you know, it's not obvious either for people who aren't, what would you say, who aren't accustomed to those sorts of extremes of experiences. It's not obvious at all how much of this sort of thing you have to become conscious of. You know, because death is obviously one of the things that terrifies people deeply. And it's not obvious how you should accustom yourself to that. So I can tell you a story that's quite interesting. I had a client at one point who was a vegetarian, and that actually turns out to be relevant. Part of the reason that she was a vegetarian was because she couldn't even go into a grocery store where there was a butcher's department. Like, she couldn't even look at the array of meat. It just horrified her. And it was associated with something that was like a sleeping beauty complex for her, because when she was a child, her parents treated her like she was a fairy princess, and they really protected her from everything. You know, remember, how many of you have seen Walt Disney's Sleeping Beauty? Yeah, well, that's interesting, eh, that so many of you would have. You remember, when the girl is born, when Sleeping Beauty is born, they don't invite someone to the christening. Who do they not invite? The witch, right? I think it's Maleficent in the Sleeping Beauty? I think that's her name. She's the one that turns into the dragon of chaos at the end of the story. Well, there's a message in there. It's like, do not shield your young people from natural catastrophe, because it makes them unconscious. And it'll come back and revisit them when they, well, especially, you know, when they grow up, when they hit puberty, it'll come back with force. And if they're if they're not prepared, the horror of that will make them unconscious. And that's what happened to this girl. Like, she was sleeping 20, 22 hours a day when she came to see me. It's like she was a fairy princess until she hit puberty, and then she was like an evil slut as far as her parents were concerned. It was like, bang, things switched completely. Of course, that was horrifying to her. But it was also tangled up for her with kind of the horror of life in general. And that was one of the ththings that made her so sensitive to, say, to these displays of meat, which are, of course, quite horrifying. You know, it's kind of remarkable that you can wander through them, you know, with, you know, maybe a little bit of discomfort, but, you know, it's slaughterhouse stuff, and, you know, to be normal is to be able to tolerate that, and that's quite strange. She couldn't tolerate it at all. So, you know, I took her to butcher shops now and then, because you do that with people. If they have an identifiable fear, it's actually quite easy to start the psychotherapeutic process, because you start to expose them voluntarily to the things that they want to avoid. So, you know, I took her into a butcher shop, and geez, you know, it just about flipped her over. You know, she sat in the car afterwards and cried for 20 minutes and told me about how terrible life was, and that she couldn't live in the face of all this, you know, dismemberment and constant death. And she was also very, very inclined towards identification, you know, with little cute animals, which is generally a fairly solid feminine trait, right? Because females are very attracted to things that are cute, and cute things are basically infantile and helpless, right? That's sort of what activates the cute detection. You know, it's part of maternal behavior, and it's really an important part, you know, because if you didn't find your babies cute, you'd really be in trouble, because they're a lot of trouble, you know, and they push you because they require so much care, so they bloody well better be cute and smiley and, you know, make friends with you. But she, like, was hyper identified with, like, little vulnerable animals, you know, and that's not good, because she wasn't just a little vulnerable animal, you know. She was also partly a predator, and human beings are partly predators. And, you know, maybe you think that's terrible, but that's how it is. And the predatory part of yourself better be incorporated and used, because otherwise, first of all, you'll be weak without it. And second of all, if you don't incorporate it, believe me, that doesn't make it go away. It'll just go out and have fun on its own in ways that are unconscious that you don't control. So she was a really good dreamer, this girl, and she actually had lucid dreams, which is quite remarkable. And sometimes she could even ask her dream characters what they symbolized. Right in the dream, you know. It's the only time I've ever seen that, although I've had some lucid dreamers in my practice. And one day she had this dream because she was really having a hard time finishing university. It was like her 6th year, 7th year, or something like that. And that was partly because she slept all the time, and then she wouldn't get anything done. Like, she was trying to sleep to avoid consciousness, right? To avoid being alive, because consciousness was too painful for her. And so she had a dream one day that she met. Actually, I'm mixing two dreams here together, but it doesn't matter, because it just sort of collapses the narrative. She dreamt that she met a gypsy that was traveling through the forest, and the gypsy told her that unless she would be willing to work in a slaughterhouse, she'd never finish her degree. So she came and told me that dream, and I thought, well, slaughterhouse, that seems a little bit difficult to arrange. You know, and she wasn't sure she could handle that anyways. And I said, well, is there anything that you can think of if you imagine something, is there anything that you can think of that, you know, might serve as a substitute? And she came back to me about a week later and she said, I want to see an embalming. And I thought, wow, that's rough. That's no doubt about that. That's rough. So I phoned around to a bunch of different funeral homes, and I told them that I had a client who was like so terrified of death that she couldn't even live, and that, you know, that I wanted to bring her to the funeral home and walk through it, and if it was possible to see an embalming preparation. And they were very understanding. It was quite interesting because, of course, funeral parlor people are kind of strange people, right? Because they're dealing with death all the time. It's like their daily life, you know? And they get so it's, well, they're not dying of horror every night, you know? They're able to deal with it, which is a good thing, because like we'd be knee deep in bodies otherwise, right? Someone has to do this sort of work. So, and apparently you can specialize in it. And so what that also means, unless you think, you know, funeral parlor directors are like completely non-human in some fundamental way, it clearly indicates that it's possible for a normal person to become so conversant with death that it's daily business. And you know, emergency department people are in that sort of situation, and people who drive ambulances, like, human beings are bloody tough. You know, we can take something like facing death and turn it into an everyday occurrence. It's like, it's kind of horrifying in a sense to think that you could be that harsh in a way, you know, but by the same token, you know, you don't want to run away screaming the first time there's an emergency in your life. You know, what the hell good are you if, you know, someone close to you gets really sick and all you can do is whine and snivel about it because it's so hard on you. It's like, it's not your turn for that. You should be strong so that you can help them, and that means that, you know, you have to be able to face these sorts of things. So anyways, we went to the funeral parlor, which is quite a weird thing for me too, because I actually have a rather squeamish stomach. I'm kind of disgust sensitive, and so it's hard for me, especially odors, they're just not good for me at all. But, you know, so I could have never been a surgeon or anything like that. But we went to the funeral parlor, and I found it extremely interesting because, first of all, you actually need to know how these things operate, because at some point you're going to be called upon to deal with them, and maybe it'd be nice if you had a little knowledge beforehand so that, you know, you didn't only have the grief that was knocking you over, but all the novelty that was associated with trying to orient yourself in that space. And so we talked to the funeral director, and we talked to him about how he sort of managed his day-to-day encounters with death. And, you know, he said he sort of saw it as his role to shepherd people through the grieving process, and that for him it had made him in some ways more acutely aware of the finitude of life, obviously, but that also made him more conscious of, you know, of each day, of the passing of each day. And, you know, that might be one of the things that's salutary about facing your own mortality. It's like, you waste time. Like, here's a good question for you guys. How many of you waste more than 4 hours a day? Okay. So I would say the reason you do that is because you haven't really faced the reality of your own death. If you had done that, you would stop doing that. You would not waste time. You know, and we could do a quick economic analysis. I like to do this with people. So what do you think your time's worth an hour? Guess. We know it's at least $10, right? Because that's minimum wage. Well, so the minimum value society puts on your labor is $10 an hour. Okay, but you know, you're smart and healthy and young, and so each hour is an investment in the future. So it has to be considered in that manner, because one of your hours is worth more to you than one of my hours is worth to me, because you have so much of your future life still depending on it. So that's a big deal. So I would say $50 an hour is probably reasonable for what you guys are worth. It's somewhere between 10 and 50 anyways. So, you know, let's assume 50. Okay, it's $200 a day. It's $1,400 a week. It's $5,600 a month. $65,000 a year. It's like, you want to waste it? Go right ahead. But that's what it's costing you, at minimum. You know, and you know, you might think, well, no, because I'm not getting paid. It's like, wrong. You're paid for your studies. You just get paid 10 years from now. It's just deferred income. And there's a huge difference between people who have B's and A's. You know, like B's, doors shut. A's, doors open. And so, you know, you waste that time, you will bloody pay for it. And you don't get it back either. So, you know, if you're awake and you know that this is waiting for you and that there's only so much time you have, that can bloody well wake you up and stop you from wasting your time, because you don't have that much of it.